Here in Zambia, copper mines are booming. Rising demand means right across Africa, the prospect for mining are bright. Yet, some of the continent's most mineral-rich countries are also the poorest when it comes to human development. Join me for this world debate. Does mining benefit Africa? Hello and welcome to the World Debate. I'm Ridi Tlhabi and I'm at the first Mining and Investment Forum in Lusaka, Zambia. I'm joined by a very diverse group of guests, all of whom have a keen interest in understanding where the income from Africa's mineral wealth ends up. Who's on my panel? Situmbeko Musokotwane, the Minister of Finance here in Zambia and the man responsible for setting the tax levels paid by mining companies and for determining how government income is spent. Claire Short, the chair of the board of the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, or EITI, based in Norway. Claire was previously the Secretary of State for International Development in Tony Blair's Labour government in the UK. Emmanuel Mutati, Chief Executive of Mopani Copper Mines, the second largest mine in Zambia, located in the Copper Belt about 4 hours north of Lusaka. Emmanuel Mutati is the first Zambian to head a major privately owned mine in the country. Andrew DeSimone from Vale, the second largest mining company in the world with operations in a number of African countries. Andrew takes care of external affairs for Vale within the Middle East and Africa. And finally, Steve Manto, an activist from Ghana who works for the Integrated Social Development Center in Accra. Steve comments regularly on the challenge of ensuring transparency in the gold mining industry in Ghana. Steve is also a member of the World Bank Extractive Industries Advisory Group. Welcome to my panel and to our audience here in Lusaka. Before we start our debate, does mining benefit Africa? Let's take a look at this overview. Zambians and international investors celebrate the opening of a new copper mine in 2009. According to the African Union, Africa holds 2/5 of the world's uranium and gold, 3/4 of the world's platinum, and 90% of the world's diamonds. And prices of most of these commodities are soaring on world markets. Yet most Africans still live in poverty. Last year, the UN reported that 35 of the world's poorest countries are in Africa. So what explains the failure to use Africa's riches to uplift the continent's citizens? Mr. Mambwe has spent 22 years driving an underground train in a Zambian copper mine. His father was also a copper miner here in Kitwe on the Zambian copper belt. He lives in a small 2-room house with his wife and extended family, and he feels workers like himself receive a raw deal from the company.
We don't have toilets here. We don't have toilets. No water. We fetch water from our neighbor there. We have a communal toilets, public one. I don't feel good. It pains me.
Mr. Mambwe has seen the mine change hands from the Zambian government to the private sector. He believes that the privatization of the mine a decade ago is one of the reasons why workers like himself have not benefited more from Zambia's copper wealth.
Shall I say the government is greedy? Once they privatize the mines, they do to the government to see the condition of workers. Nothing has been achieved.
His employer is Mopani Copper Mines, one of the largest mines in the world. Mopani's majority shareholder is multinational commodity trading company Glencore. Glencore's $10 billion listing in May this year was the largest ever on the London Stock Exchange. A recent audit study commissioned by the Zambian Revenue Authority and leaked to the public earlier this year accuses Mopani and Glencore of understating their revenues and overstating their costs in order to avoid paying taxes. The report also accuses Mopani of selling copper to its parent company at discount prices. Mopani and Glencore deny the allegations. Accusations that mining companies in Africa are guilty of tax evasion by cooking the books are not new. In 2006, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, or EITI, was established as a global partnership between governments, mining companies and community groups to help ensure greater openness. Countries wishing to be full EITI members must produce a report setting out all the payments from mining companies and all the receipts to the government. In Zambia, the taxes paid by mining companies used to be secret. Zambia recently published an EITI report setting out these payments and hopes to gain full EITI membership soon. Mining Minister Maxwell Mwale says that this process has improved accountability at local level.
Most communities in the mining areas do not realize that mining companies pay what we call rates to the local authorities. And it's out of those rates that the local authorities are supposed to provide services to those communities.
Zambia has been criticized for failing to increase its tax levels enough now that international copper prices are at an all-time high. But the government argues that the benefits of mining are clear for everyone to see: employment, tax, and improvements in the areas around the mines. At the Lumwana copper mine, the mining company built houses and schools for the local community even before beginning production. But critics of the way mining operates in Africa point to both the impact of mining pollution and waste on people's health and the fact that the majority of people, even in resource-rich African countries like Zambia, still live in poverty.
The policy framework is not conducive. It doesn't benefit the Zambians. In fact, it benefits the investors more than than it benefits the local people. And that's exactly our challenge. We want the government to come up with policies and regulations that will benefit the Zambian people.
All right, let's start with you, Claire Short. You have said that resources are a curse to African countries where they're located. How could you make such an astonishing statement?
I'm quoting other people. I'm not the first to say it. And it's not just Africa, it's more broadly. Countries that are rich in mineral resources and in oil tend to have problems of corruption, poor governance, a lot of money leaving the country, a rich elite not sharing with all the people. It goes with the territory. And what we've got to do is change that, because it really isn't good enough those resources belong to the people.
Minister, Claire does have a point, doesn't she? You are known in Zambia as the powerhouse, especially when it comes to copper mining, and yet there is high unemployment here. You count amongst the 25 poorest nations. How do you reconcile the mineral wealth and the poverty in this country?
Well, first of all, please do remember that a lot of the poverty that we see today in Zambia is precisely because we in the 70s, 80s and 90s, we copied what the Labour government in the UK did, which was to nationalize everything. And then a few years later, they discovered themselves that they had gone in the wrong direction. They privatized. We didn't do that. You know, it's very difficult for government to run a mine.
So you prefer privatization, but with privatization, are you getting a good deal as Zambia?
We are getting a good deal. The moment we nationalize, production went down like this. The moment we privatized, the situation went up like that. The end result, you see the amount of investment taking place in the country, the increasing material well-being of the Zambian people. There's still a lot getting poor. I mean, there's still a lot who are poor, yes. But we are getting there, and the path that we've taken is the correct one.
I'm going to challenge you on that fact later on.
No problem.
But Emmanuel Mutati, that video that we've just seen, a worker working for Mopani for 22 years. That is a very, very long time. A company that reported billions in profits just last year, and you have a worker who has loyally worked for you for 22 years, no electricity, no toilets, and living in poverty. That can't be right.
I think we need to understand where we're coming from. At the time of privatization, the house stock was delinked from the new mine owners and became private property of individual miners. The responsibility for that transferred from the new mine owners to the councils.
Aren't you passing the buck here? It's other people, not Mopani.
No, I'm coming to that point. They do have electricity. The toilets have been an issue. And as Mopani, we have stepped in. We are spending $4.5 million to construct 1,800 toilets with water facility. And these toilets will be complete in August this year.
Let's talk about the much talked about audit report that was leaked that showed massive corruption, mispricing, and you are being accused as Mopani by Glenn Thornton of actually inflating your operational costs, but at the same time underestimating your production volumes. They're essentially accusing you of cooking your books, are you?
It's most unfortunate that report was leaked before it was even discussed with us.
But why is it relevant to discuss it before? Was it true or not? Were you cooking the books?
No, it's not. Absolutely not. The auditors failed to understand the process of mining. 50% of the copper that we treat comes from external, from other companies. And when we have turned that material into finished copper, we have to give it back to the other company. Unfortunately, the report took the total volume coming out of our refinery, multiplied that by the price at the time, and attributed all that to Mopani, when in fact only 50% of that was.
But they're saying you obstructed the investigations, and I think for me, this reveals a fundamental problem of the mining process. How is it that in this complicated mining relationship with you as stakeholders and many other stakeholders from civil societies, you seem to be the only ones who understand the business model? Does that not reflect the transparency and openness? If you had been more transparent and open, everybody else would understand your business model.
We are as transparent as can be. Anybody's free to come and visit us and see what we do.
There's another accusation that is also quite serious, that you as Mopani, you're selling copper to your parent company, Glencore, at a lower level. As a seller, surely you should be striving to enjoy maximum benefits from that which you sell.
As a producer and a seller, we get our revenues based on the prevailing price on the London Metal Exchange.
Steve, let's talk about the power relations between companies and government as they reflect themselves in Ghana. What can you tell us about that?
No, clearly you have a situation where the companies operating in our countries have budgets several times the budget of the host country. And therefore, clearly they are able to influence the political elite into getting contracts that actually inure to their exclusive advantage. But again, on the question of why we fail to maximize benefits, it's clearly a failure of governance, which has given a field day to the mining companies. You have a situation in Africa where most countries enact mining codes before thinking about policy. This is clearly an aberration, because clearly you need to have a policy which articulates your vision in terms of what role you expect mining to play in your national economy.
Minister, is there a failure of governance here in Africa?
Well, I can't speak about Ghana, but certainly for Zambia, the way we do the policies, say, for example, on taxation, you have to understand that in this world, there has to be cooperation between those who have resources and those who have the financial means. We can have the minerals in the ground, but at this point in time, if we are not able to attract those with the financial means to come and work with us, then there will be no mine taking place.
But how far do you go in that? I'm reminded of what your late President Levi Mwanawasa said, that Zambia cannot continue to get pennies for its mineral wealth. There's also a leading economist from Oxford who said, Paul Colliers, who said that in Zambia, the wealth has been plundered to the benefit of the companies and not the people. He singles out Zambia as a case in point. So how far do you go in making concessions?
I don't agree with that. When it comes to the issue of sharing, for example, in issues of taxation, we've looked at the tax laws in South Africa, we've looked at the tax laws in Canada, Australia, Brazil, Ghana, everywhere. Our tax law is comparable. For anyone, therefore, to say we are acting outside the norms, when what we have is comparable with what obtains everywhere else in the world, that is a terrible mistake. And if we go along this route, this is the beginning of poverty, because this is the way we were being taught in the 70s, that look, you are being exploited, take everything away, that way you're going to be rich, the very opposite happened. Because unfortunately, there's competition about investment. We can't act, you can't do your laws outside what everybody else does.
I want to challenge that model because clearly we seem to think that by lowering taxes, we make our countries attractive to foreign direct investment. It's misplaced. Okay. It is misplaced because the copper can be found only in a few places in the world. It won't go anywhere if you leave it in the ground.
So, Minister, that's exactly it. Have you fallen for the blackmail where investors are threatening you with leaving? An example in Zimbabwe, there's talk of indigenization, but there's a lot of mining activity that is still happening. Levi Mwanawasa raised the windfall tax, and there was much agitation, and then it was dropped again. You're letting them determine the terms of this relationship.
Why don't you tell me any mining country in the world that is windfall tax in the manner that it was introduced then? You don't find it in Chile, you don't find it in Australia, you don't find it in Canada, you don't find it in Chile.
They tried to bring it in Australia.
Yeah, and the government went down. So why do you want Africans to always do the wrong things so that they become poor, and in the end, you end up saying the Africans are mismanaged?
Just respond to that. These are multinational investors. They are the engine of our economies. Why are you hounding them?
All over the world, there's been secrecy, total secrecy about the contracts, about how much the production was, about how much they really pay to the government, how much the government receives. If there's nothing to hide, let's get all of this out in the open. Let the people know what it costs, how much being produced, what proportion of profits are being paid in taxes. That's what we're trying to do with IEITI for part of it, so that the people can know and the people can then hold their governments to account.
But you don't go far enough, do you?
Too often, no, we can't do it all because we're a coalition of companies, governments and civil society. So we can only go as far as that coalition will go. But once we start to get the figures out in the open, people can ask more questions. What was the level of production? You know, therefore, how much of the tax came to our country? Compare one country with another. But this is a systemic problem all over the place. There's so much money around oil and minerals, and of course commodity prices go up and down, that a lot of this gets hidden, and all these companies tend not to pay as much as they should towards the countries in which they're based.
Certainly when prices are going up, we should share that benefit with the indigenous people. It's as simple as that.
We should, are we?
No, we should. That's why I'm coming to the point. The principle of having windfall tax or any form of tax that reflects the increase in prices is welcome. What was wrong with windfall tax was the application of it. Right? The principle was fine, the mechanics were wrong. Right? Windfall tax was applied to total revenue regardless of your cost levels. What the minister is saying is what we'd like to see. You allowed a certain margin of profit above which you have, say, a sliding scale of taxation. And that is fine. Then you can share those benefits.
Andrew DeSimone from Vale, the second largest mining company in the world with operations in a number of African countries. You've got your own tax issues. The government in Brazil is asking you to pay $15 billion US in taxes, money that you've made in your foreign operations. You're challenging the government's request for you to pay this money in taxes.
On that subject, I can just say that that's in debate in Brazil. It's a question of the form by which we value the royalties versus what the government has discussed also. And it's an issue which is in debate with the government.
But you are disputing this claim by the government that you have unpaid taxes to the tune of $15 billion US.
The two of us are questioning the forms by which you arrive at this amount. And the issue in general is under negotiations between Brazilian counterparts and the Brazilian government.
Don't you think if there was more transparency, as Claire has said, where it was very clear what you're making, where and how, that you wouldn't be in this dispute?
I think going forward, in the industry as a whole and for the private investors involved, transparency is no doubt essential to creating more confidence by the investor. That creates more ease to make long-term investments in a country, because it's not just a question of who invests in a country, but the quality of the investment and where that goes, not just in mining, but mining is a platform for long-term economic growth.
And can I add, it's both Are the companies paying fairly? Are they hiding what they make in different countries in the way that's been alleged? But there's then also a question, how much goes to the government and how is the government spending the money? There's two streams of accountability. Is the government spending the money well on the people and the poorest people who need it most, or are the elite getting richer and the poor getting poorer? That's the second part of the question.
Steve, aren't you being a bit unrealistic? There are operational costs. Often the multinational companies come to a country at great risks to themselves. There's political instability in some countries. Are you just imagining this utopia where you get everything that you put in?
No, it's not just mere imagination. Clearly, we give a lot of incentives to get them to come over. And so they pay very little in terms of taxes. But even the very little that is required of them to pay, they don't pay. And that's wherein lies the problem. I think sometimes we tend to oversimplify.
Aren't you generalizing here, Steve?
No, we tend to oversimplify the tax. It's not a function of tax levels. It is a function of our ability to collect the taxes that are imposed. Okay. And I think we have weak tax administrative systems, and that allows the companies to get away with the non-payment of taxes, as is being alleged in the case of Glencore.
That's very important.
But you've got to take what Steve is saying, the point that Steve is saying, because in the case of Mopani, it was the Zambian Tax Authority that commissioned this much disputed report by Grant Thornton. That suggests that they had suspicions that Mopani is not declaring everything that it has made and thus not paying the taxes that it should have paid.
Well, it is true. It is the Zambian tax authorities, the Zambian government that commissioned these studies, and with the assistance of cooperating partners. And I must also say that this study was not specifically Mopani. This study was on 3 mining companies in Zambia: Mopani, First Quantum, and KCM. And in all 3, there are issues to be resolved. So sometimes I get amused that the focus is on Mopani. Of course, I'm happy because hopefully there'll be more tax coming out of this. But there were 3. There were 3 companies, and in each of these 3 companies, there are issues. So we have to be.
Is the government going to publish the reports? The reports, I think, belong to the Revenue Authority. Can we have them published?
Minister, would you do that?
Well, you see, please do remember that tax law everywhere in the world, Zambia and elsewhere, the tax issues of an individual or a company and the tax authority is not something that will come and display in public.
But that's the wealth of the people. Why not? Why don't you be bold? Why don't you be bold and tell people who own the mineral wealth what is coming in for the resources? You have to act within
the laws that you've passed. Whether it is in Africa, whether it is Europe, you must act according to the law.
The public interest is a riding principle in the interpretation of the law. And so far as it borders on the public interest, I think the public has to know.
Please understand this. If the tax authorities in Ghana had issues with you specifically,
I'm a personal person. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
as an individual.
Yeah. The moment they started publishing those correspondence with you in the public, you would have the legal right to take them to court.
Okay, doesn't the minister have a point here? The minister has a point. You can't put sensitive information out there in the public. Are you saying that there should be transparency to a point that we know every single strategy, every single piece of information about the multinational companies?
We should know what companies invest, what they produce, what the profits are, what they pay in tax, what the workers get paid. Surely, these are public resources.
Absolutely, that is correct, but the exchange between me and the tax person...
Not your letters, and we don't need your letters, we just need the figures.
The figures are open. The figures are open.
I must support the minister. The figures are open. We're a public company. We submit our annual accounts to the Securities Exchange. We submit to the Ministry of Mines, and the half-yearly results go into the paper.
But the allegation is that, and this is widespread, there's a hiding of profits across the world to minimize taxation. This isn't only here, this is widely alleged that lots of multinational companies do this.
Okay, let's go to the World Bank. Kapil Kapoor, help us out here. How should we resolve our issues around transparency and openness?
Frankly, I don't see any issues around transparency and openness. What I hear everyone agreeing is there needs to be greater levels of transparency, there need to be greater levels of openness. My personal view is this debate is far too narrow. What countries like Zambia need is the creation of jobs. Okay, what is very, very critical is not only do countries like Zambia need to mobilize more revenues, but what they do with these revenues, how they invest these revenues in health, education, skills development, infrastructure, and create the jobs that are necessary for poverty reduction. Transparency in the declaration of revenues is just the starting point.
Because, you know, in the end, the mines will be used up. The coal is gone in Britain. You have to use that wealth to invest in the economy, to lift up the people, to create new sectors of the economy so there's jobs for everyone beyond mining. If you don't do that, when the copper goes down in price or the copper is finished, there's nothing.
Xavier Mwamba?
I think it's quite clear that before privatization and after privatization, if I was to walk into one of the mining township where Mopani is working, the communities are worse off in different measures. So I think we should not be naive again. The mining companies will not come here, get the mine, get the profits, and share voluntarily equally with us. Those charged with decision making, the politicians, must step up the responsibility of making sure this happens. It won't happen voluntarily. I think we must make the mining companies give us our fair share. Whether it means negotiating with them a fair deal, if they're not willing to negotiate, we actually can do it by force, increasing our stake. I'm not advocating for nationalization, but if you look at countries like Botswana, it's common sense that it's only those governments that have a large stake in the running, the decision-making about these investments that benefit mostly from resources. It's not happening in Zambia, and I think politicians have the responsibility. And unfortunately, if one was to close their eyes, he would think the politicians and the mining companies belong to the same entity.
Minister, I'd like you to respond to this, that in Zimbabwe right now, there's policy of indigenization. In South Africa, where I come from, there are very powerful politicians who are advocating nationalization because they're saying that the private companies have not helped them at all. Are you not afraid that if jobs are not being created, if the wealth doesn't go to the people, you'll be returning to that kind of debate here in Zambia?
Well, good luck to the Zimbabweans. Good luck to the South Africans. But for us, this is a path that we've trodden before. As I said, in the 70s, we're being told, if you take over these mines, then you're going to be rich. The very opposite happened.
Xavier says that there's high unemployment, and in many areas, the situation hasn't improved with privatization. How do you respond to that?
The answer to that is that if you are thinking about having the labor-intensive mines of the 70s and so forth, that is no longer sustainable, because you have to compete against Chile and all these people. So forget about that. The way to increase the labor force in the mining sector, one, continue to be more attractive so that you don't just depend on 2-3 mines to provide the jobs, but now you depend on 40-50 mines to create the jobs.
But there won't be enough jobs just for mining.
No,
for the people of Zambia.
That is true. Two, in the input sector, let's create industries that are going to replace some of the imports that we are currently having in the mining sector so that the jobs are being created. On the output side, let's create, and this is what this government is doing in the case of Zambia, value addition. So that we make wires, we make bronze, we make brass, we make starter motors to feed into the South African motor industries. This is the way you are going to create more jobs and value addition in the country.
But also educate the people, invest in other sectors, make an economy that's growing, that generates jobs in all sorts of sectors.
But isn't that what you meant about the curse? There's another way of looking at that, that because Africa is endowed with mineral wealth, perhaps there are industries that have been neglected, that should have been developed to create these positive aspects that you're talking about.
Big wealth flows from oil and minerals, they go to the government spends that money and doesn't have to tax the people and think of how to generate wealth from right through the economy. And so everything focuses on the big streams of money coming out of these sectors, and it holds back the development of the rest of the economy. That's the pattern.
You know another perspective to this. Unless we start using these resource sectors to learn how to interact with the investor community, unless we use this as an example, we are going to lag behind. Why? Because you have countries like Japan, you have countries like Korea, you've got countries like Taiwan, they have no minerals. but they are very rich. Why? Because they've learned to know how to interact with investment communities so that minerals or no minerals, they'll be able to make money.
But people are queuing up to invest in commodities.
I would like to add to the Minister's comments, a bedrock of economic growth in any country is stability for investments, be them local, private companies, or international companies. That's very important. However, there's three responsibilities there of the private investor, of the local government, of the civil society that we have to work together. Now, in the extent to the private investor, Vale or any other company, we speak about this undercapacity sometimes, where the mining company has so much more of a vast knowledge of how contracts are created, of how they can claim what they pay and what they don't pay, and then the local government doesn't know. Well, what we all need to do here is reduce risk. When we reduce risk, we're all more engaging, more money can flow, and it can flow for long term, and we can have quality investors that invest for 10, 20, 30 years. Our role in the private sector needs to be engaged in this dialogue with the civil society and with the local governments. And I should say, if there are models out there about new ways in which contracts can be created, about new regimes, which again, it's not a question of necessarily paying more or less, it's a question of how the money is spent, and on the government side, how it's going to be spent.
All right.
We are willing to share that information and work towards it.
Let's find out more about how your company, Vale, operates, especially when it comes to the environment. As mining companies move into pristine new areas, they are becoming increasingly aware of the need to address the fears expressed by local people. The Brazilian multinational mining company Vale is rapidly expanding its operations in Africa, with new mines being developed in at least 7 African countries, including Zambia. But how will Vale deal with environmental concerns on this continent? The company is no stranger to controversy in its home country of Brazil. Despite fierce opposition from environmentalists, Vale placed a mine in the Amazon rainforest. In its promotional material, the company explains that it has put a great deal of effort into repairing the damage it caused. But if actions speak louder than words, Vale's record is mixed. The company has been fined in several countries, including Brazil, for illegal pollution. Canadian environmentalists are opposed to a current plan by Vale to dump almost 400,000 tons of what they say is toxic waste from a nickel mine into a freshwater lake. They say Vale is refusing to build a much safer containment facility in order to cut its costs. Hleuza, you are in the environmental department of Vale. We've just seen a clip of the work that you're doing in the environment scenario. How much of that is real and how much of it is PR?
Well, in Vale we have a lot of programs for environment, for project plannings and the operations. And you consider a lot of specific actions for each one. We consider in sustainability 4 special pillars: human resource, social responsibility, environmental, and health and safety. We respect our countries where Vale is.
Is that true, though? Let's talk about the waste from the nickel mine in Canada that is going into a lake. And the argument there is that for you to build a containment facility for this waste is going to cost you over $400 million. You are choosing to use the lake because it's a cheaper option for Vale.
In Canada, nowadays we are implementing a specific program for environment.
But in the past, is this true? Yes, the accusations were true?
We intend to correct all emissions there until 2018. And we have a specific programs in new technologies. And we are sure with this complete program there, we will correct all problems that we have there.
I know that in Canada the law does allow you a specific quantity of emissions, but why did you not just do the right thing?
Vale has been active in Canada only for several years now, and in many countries we've been only active for several years. But what I can say is that the stringency of the environmental standards that exist in Brazil is certainly something that, together with global standards, World Bank and others who contribute to this, we will apply, and we apply in all countries.
Even if it costs you a lot of money, you will do the right thing for the environment.
We have no choice now to in the future.
Okay. Let's hear from environmentalist Petrus Nkamba. There we go.
If government does not respect its policies, we have the same problem. Our organization went to court 2 years ago over environmental protection, Lafarge. And we went to court and won $13.2 million on behalf of government. This government today is in Supreme Court challenging us, okay, with Lafarge. Now, how do you go to court as government to challenge someone who has won $13.2 million on your behalf?
So, Minister, how do you respond to that? You don't implement your own environmental laws?
Well, I'm sorry I can't discuss that much because I don't know much about environment. The only thing that I deal with as far as environment is concerned, I'm always fighting with environment people who say you can't build a hotel there because you are going to destroy the environment. You can't build a mine there because you are going to destroy the environment. My answer is that if you are going to have development, obviously some destruction to the environment is inevitable.
But what are the long-term effects?
The only thing is that, of course, we have to be sensible. What I see other countries do is they focus a lot on the mitigation factors to protect the environment rather than saying we can't have that investment because the environment is, will not permit. I see cities in Europe, for example, they are built along the rivers, but here the moment you want to build a hotel near the river, the environment people say, you are going to destroy the environment. Of course, then you delay the jobs.
But mining can be very environmentally destructive, or you can make sure that the mines have to, when they're finished, leave a decent place behind them.
Well, I said I don't know these things. That's why I want to get into that debate.
But, Minister, it is an important debate, considering that it is well documented people have fallen ill because of the actions of mines. There is no point having citizens that are sick and cannot contribute to the economy. So not only mining and chasing the bottom line, but the well-being of the environment as it affects the people is also important.
I agree. As I said, I don't know much about this thing, but please remember also, sometimes the focusing on mining and then forgetting that almost any other type of economic activity has got its hazards. We have to be careful about that, because if you read today, people say these cell phones that you put in your ears, what do they bring? They'll bring cancer. But I hardly ever hear anybody saying, oh, go and chase after Nokia or this company because of that. So let's balance things out.
Okay, all right. Comments from the audience. Do you accept that? Do you accept that? Let's come here, sir.
Sixtus Mlenga from the mining industry. I think for Zambia, mining has been very positive. It's been the driver of our economy. And as the Minister and Mr. Mutati said, we've gone through the whole cycle. We came from private to nationalization and private. And the good news now is that we are wiser. And we are going to be the model for the world on how the country can bring about development for its people, for its benefit.
Okay, I'm sure that's making you all smile. That's making us smile. Let's come this side to you, sir.
My name is Jimmy Lungu. I'm a miner. Cray, by the time the Zambian government was privatizing the mines from ZCCM to these other companies, where were our former colony? Why didn't British companies come to Zambia and invest in these mines, and then them start being as transparent as you want those companies to be? Thank you.
Unfortunately, I don't run Britain. I think it might be better if I did, but that's not my job.
Right at the back, yes, ma'am.
I'm from civil society. I have a very quick question for Honorable Musokotwane. I just wanted to find out, of late we've seen a lot of development projects, and we are being told that the money is coming from the mines, and that Zambia is getting a lot of money from the mines. How much money are we getting from there?
Minister, how much money are you getting from the mines? The people have heard that there's lots of money and Zambia is loaded.
Well, this is a very long story. I've explained this on television several times. So I'm sure she can come and I can take her through the figures and then tell her what is happening.
So you're not making a lot of money?
Well, we are making reasonable money. Please again understand this thing. What is happening now after privatization? It's like a farmer planting a seed in the ground. That seed begins to grow. The time comes when you start harvesting. Now, the issue that I hear a lot about Zambia is that, you see, these mining companies are not paying enough taxes. Now, if a mine is matured like the way First Quantum is, today it's the single biggest payer of taxes in the country because it has matured. It has come to the level where it can pay the taxes. But if we are going to have the attitude where somebody sinks a hole in the ground today, then tomorrow you say you're not paying enough taxes, then we are shooting ourselves in the feet. Well, I like a comment that came from somebody there. I think what I'm looking forward to is the examples of Sister Mlenga here, and many of these Zambians who have had long years of experience in the mining sector. The next thing that we want to see, we want to assist these people to get to the level where they don't just know how to dig and produce the copper, but how they can make projects, go to the capital markets, create the mines, because many of these miners who come here, they come with very little money, but they have the knowledge of how to go to the capital markets, to prepare the documents, and create the companies. That's what we want to see in these people, the experts, so that this debate about foreigners and local dies away. It is about an issue of how we can encourage investors, whether they are local or foreign, especially local, so that they can begin to own these mines.
Final thoughts. So the woman from civil society, see the Zambian EITI report, it gives her all the numbers of what the mining companies are paying to the government. She can see that now.
Okay, then your final thoughts, Claire?
Well, I think our friend from the World Bank said everyone's in favour of transparency. Yes, in theory. But we have to get these figures in front of the public, and the public have to both make sure the companies pay and the government uses the money well. And there's a lot more to do. And it's the people who will drive that, and they need the information in order to do it.
Emmanuel, final thoughts?
I would like to register that there's been benefits. We have had benefits from privatization. In the case of Mopani, at the time of privatization, we only had 10,000 employees. That rose by April 2008 to 20,000 employees. The life of our mines have been extended. At the time of privatization, Mufulira only had 5 years. Now we are talking about another 10 years from now, and possibly longer. In the case of environment, government enacted a law some time back where each mining company is going to make provisions towards what they call the Environmental Protection Fund. And we do that on an annual basis.
Let's come to you, Andrew. We'll end with you, Steve. I have nothing against you. I'll come to you in just a moment.
A few points. The first is that this issue of sustainability has at least 3 components. There are the actions in sustainability of the private investor. It is the framework in sustainability of the government. And it is the attitude and actions of the civil society. Going forward, there is no way that we and serious investors and that benefits can accrue to Africa or anywhere if we do not work all 3 together, leaving rhetoric aside, having a long-term objective, and having this dialogue. And finally, where we are right here in Zambia, we may be here 30, 40 years. If we have another mine, we'll be here 200 years. But we certainly have the outlook that the best legacy we can leave in a mining company, beyond the profits that we generate for our shareholders and is essential, but is also that it's a platform for economic diversification. There's GDP growth and there's GDP diversification. We need a lot more of the latter to complement the former. So the way that we can contribute to that to Zambia, to Zambia's workers, and to the local situation here is something that we have to know from day one, and we have to realize we do until year 30, and it's unquestionable.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Steve, mining benefited the continent?
Well, to those who say the revenues are coming in and therefore mining is the best thing that happened to Zambia, I want to challenge them, and especially the government of Zambia, to do a cost-benefit analysis, an analysis of the cost of mining to the environment and society, the displacements of people and all that, and you find that you are not making much progress. In Ghana, a study by the Environmental Protection Agency puts the cost of mining to the environment alone at 4% of GDP. In fact, another study by the World Bank, also on Ghana, puts it at 10% of GDP. And if your economy is growing at 6%, it's up to you to make the judgment as to whether or not you are growing your economy or not.
Well, I think for me, mining has been very good to Zambia. We saw in our country when the mining sector declined, it was clear to everybody in this country that things were declining. This is how even social infrastructure was rotting. Reverse that, and it's evident to everybody that this country is making progress. Now, the last point I want to make is this, and this is advice to you colleagues from the NGOs. Your salaries are normally paid by people from the West and things like that. So it is fine for you, you have your salaries.
Lots of them are local churches. They're not all foreign.
Not here. I think most of it comes from NGOs from Europe and America and so forth. So your salaries are paid. It's okay for you to say no mining, but you are paid the salary generated by somebody else. For a Zambian, for every other Zambian, the chance of being funded from outside is not there. They must find a job, and if mining can provide them a job, why not?
Well, that's it from me, Ridi Tlhabi. I would like to thank the panel, of course, and the audience, and wherever you may be watching or listening to the World Debate. Thank you for joining us. Goodbye.